Hi, Sandra here, the Misophonia therapist, and in today's video, I'm going to be answering the question, what emotion is being not felt or expressed with misophonia? So whenever you hear the sound that triggers you, often the most common responses tend to be extreme rage, anger, or disgust, or a combination of all those things. Anxiety as well, and feelings of panic, of course, too. But there is a theory that misophonia is a symptom of an emotion which you haven't resolved, an emotion that perhaps is still lurking in the subconscious mind, not just the emotion, but the feeling that's been unresolved in relation to something or someone that's triggered it in the past. So in order to make this make more sense, when we are very young, often we don't have the intellectual capacity to be able to think our way logically out of a problem or a situation. So let's say, for example, your mother or your sister said or did something that made you feel angry. It could be any situation at all. It doesn't necessarily need to be something traumatic or abusive. That's not necessarily what this is about. But it's about how we, as very young children, often don't process emotion in a way that makes sense to us. So if somebody, a family member, maybe your mum, your sister, a friend, did something to upset you when you were young, you would have felt an emotion. So let's say, for example, it's disappointment or anger. Now, in years to come, years later, something else happens that makes you think, or rather makes you feel, that same emotion, the emotional intensity that just reminds your subconscious mind of a time when it felt that emotion. And it doesn't necessarily have to bear any resemblance to that situation. Now, with misophonia, that, like I said before, there are certain theories that really it's an expression of an unresolved emotion. So let's go back to the original example. Maybe your mum or your sister did something to really upset you when you were a child. It doesn't have to be trauma or abuse, anything like that, just something that upset you. And you didn't, I don't know, maybe you just didn't quite figure out what the situation really meant. You weren't able to see it in a different way. You weren't able to use logic, but the feeling you had was very strong and you internalize it. And it's no great coincidence that many people do seem to develop misophonia in childhood, early childhood. Remember all those meals sitting around the table when you were told that you couldn't get down from the table because you had to finish your meal first, or you were told that you couldn't go off and do something that you really wanted to do until you'd finished eating. Of course, this is pure conjecture. It's just an example. But I think what I'm trying to say is, in some cases, maybe that theory holds water. Maybe it makes sense. I don't know. We are all different. So could misophonia really be a manifestation of an emotion or a feeling that you have not fully resolved in your mind? and chances are perhaps you've forgotten about it. So maybe you could start to think about what you're really angry about. Has somebody upset you? Are you angry with somebody? And if so, what way forward could there be? And again, I'm not suggesting that everybody with misophonia has unresolved anger. That really isn't it. But I do think that some of the psychological underpinnings of this deeply fascinating and complex condition could be unresolved emotion, particularly anger. And don't forget that anger is not an emotion that seems to be particularly favoured. It's not an emotion that we are encouraged to feel, especially if we are women. So it's food for thought. And if this makes sense to you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. And of course, if you are watching me on YouTube, please consider subscribing to my channel, as I really want to try to raise a bit more awareness. And if you're on other platforms like TikTok or Instagram, please consider following me.